Hello BookTube, this is part 20 of my 2022 library tour. I'm continuing with my history shelves. This is history, let me go count real quick. 8. This is part 8 of history. Last Friday I finished what I call History 1, which is this bookcase, which is on top of another bookcase, which combined constitutes History 1. This week I'll be moving on to History 2, which is this bookcase right here that I'm usually covering up. So let's get going, shall we? Now, most of these books are new acquisitions over the past few months, and so I haven't read most of them yet. Some of them I have read, but most of them I haven't. So how I have my history shelves organized at the moment is initially by size. So these two shelves here were organized by size because the shelves themselves aren't equal in size. So smaller books are on the smaller shelves and that sort of thing. But once I got to this bookcase here, I started organizing them basically by when I get them. So if you go check my book hauls for the last few months, you will see them. I mean, and obviously the very end of this set of tour of shelves on Thursday, when I'll finish off history, pretty much they were in my January book haul. So anyway, let's get started with the books for today. First is 1688, The First Modern Revolution by Steve Pincus. This is a history of the build-up to the Glorious Revolution, the deposition of James II, and the accession of Mary II and William III. I think it's William III. And I think maybe the first year of the Revolution. I picked this up from, I want to say Midtown Scholar. This was, I think, the second or third book from them I picked up, and I haven't gotten to it yet. Next is Ravenna, Capital of Empire, Crucible of Europe, by Judith Herron. This is a history of the city of Ravenna, which was for a time the capital of the Western Roman Empire, and the history goes from the 300s to probably the 700s, or maybe a little bit beyond. I did read this for my name tag TBR as part of No Fiction 2022, and this was one of the books that I bailed on. Now hopefully I will come back to it and we'll have a much better reading experience whenever that is. Next is a royal biography. This is Mary Tudor, Princess, Bastard, Queen by Anna Whitelock. This is a biography of Mary I. I read it a few years ago and I remember quite liking it, but it's been a while since I've read it, so I need to come back to it. Although it is a shame, I have a biography of Mary, but I don't have one of Elizabeth. Although I do have one for Elizabeth II. Just not for Elizabeth I, which I need to correct at some point. Anyway, next up is Idi Amin, The Story of Africa's Icon of Evil by Mark Leopold. This is a biography and I think an analysis of the character of Idi Amin, who was the dictator of Uganda in the 70s and I think very early 80s. Next is Empires of Vice, The Rise of Opium Prohibition Across Southeast Asia by Diana S. Kim. This is a history of the war on drugs enacted by Britain and France in their Southeast Asian colonial possessions. Once they realized that controlling regions with a high level of drug addiction is not necessarily what they want. I think I tried to read this last year for Nonfiction November, or maybe slightly before, and I ended up bailing on it. It's interesting, but it is incredibly academic and incredibly dense. Next is another royal biography. This is Catherine the Great, Portrait of a Woman by Robert K. Massey. This is a biography of Catherine of Russia. She was one of the few women to rule as empress in her own right, as sovereign empress. And she was very fascinating. I want to say I've read a biography of her before when I was younger, but I don't remember much about it, or exactly when that was. Returning to Africa, this is Dictatorland, The Men Who Stole Africa by Paul Kenyon. This is a look at a number of dictators in certain countries of Africa that are especially resource rich. Oil, chocolate, gold, diamonds, people. And some of the countries looked at are Libya, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Eritrea, and this is fascinating. I really enjoyed this book. Next is Life and Society in the Hittite World by Trevor Bryce. This is the second of a loose trilogy of Hittite histories by Trevor Bryce. We saw the first one early in the tour. It was a general history of the Hittite kingdom. This is basically a history of life in society, culture, that sort of thing, everyday life among the Hittites in their empire. And then the third one is about the Hittite military, which I don't have. But I've read this before and I think I quite liked it. Next is another work of ancient history. This is The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt by Toby Wilkinson. This is another really good history of ancient Egypt. And Toby Wilkinson is a fantastic writer. So quite happy to have this in my collection. Next is Victoria's Century, the United Kingdom, 1800 to 1906 by David Kennedy. This is a history of Britain in the 19th and very early 20th centuries. I haven't gotten to it yet. This is an ex-library copy from Phoenix Public Library, and I want to say I bought this, I think, from the Friends of the Phoenix Public Library, which does have an online store with Libris. Next is a book that came out late last year. This is Conquistadores, A New History of Spanish Discovery and Conquest by Fernando Cervantes. This is about the conquistadors, obviously. Let me see if it's translated. Doesn't say, so I'm thinking it's was written in English, but I haven't gotten to it yet, but I intend to at some point. Next is Post-War, A History of Europe Since 1945 by Tony Jute. I want to say I picked this up from the Friends of the Phoenix Public Library too, or somewhere. Anyway, I'm very fascinated in post-World War II history, and I've been wanting to pick this up for a while, and need to get to it at some point. Next is another book that one that I really loved last year, although I didn't add it to my top 10 list. This is Noble Ambitions, The Fall and Rise of the English Country House After World War II by Adrian Tenniswood. This is a rollicking, hilarious, amazing history of English country houses since World War II, from basically their inhabitants having to sell them because they couldn't afford them anymore, either because of rises in taxes or death duties, to these houses being demolished or repurposed or turned into tourist attractions, either by their owners or by various trusts, either the National Trust or I don't know what the proper name for English Heritage is, which has a YouTube channel that features a cooking series called The Victorian Way with Kathy Hipperson as Mrs. Crocombe, which are delightful. To the new elite sort of buying these houses and sort of taking over the roles of the old aristocracy. It's just, this is a blast of a book. I loved it. Next is The Dead Are Arising, The Life of Malcolm X by Les Payne and Tamara Payne. This is a biography of Malcolm X, likely to be the definitive biography of Malcolm X for the foreseeable future. I picked it up after reading it for the BookTube Prize. This is one of the few that I wanted to own due to the BookTube Prize rather than having to buy it because my local library didn't have it in either physical form or ebook when I had to read books for the prize on ebook. Next is New Lefts, The Making of a Radical Tradition by Terence Renaud. Picked this up from Princeton University in August during one of their sales. And I picked it up because I'm very interested in 20th century history, the history of the left, and so quite happy to have it, and I need to get to it. And also, it has a radical cover. I love that cover. Next is another work of ancient history. This is In Search of the Phoenicians by Josephine Quinn. This book is partially a history of the Phoenicians, or the peoples we call Phoenicians. But Quinn also argues that the Phoenicians are, relative to the people for which Phoenicians refer to, is a construct created by other people, primarily Greeks, to refer to those we call Phoenicians. The Phoenicians themselves would have seen themselves as being Sidonians or Tyrians or Biblosians or whatnot, and also their family lineages, but not as a geographical people, Phoenicians. When they did begin to think of themselves as Phoenicians, it was always later, once they were subject peoples to either Greeks or Romans, and they deployed the Phoenician as a sort of there was a purpose behind it. So this is a very fascinating book. The one problem I have is that there are bits where Quinn goes to the late 19th century, early 20th century Ireland, and also there's, I think, Renaissance or early Enlightenment Britain chapter that I'm not entirely sure, that sort of the more contemporary sort of attitudes towards the Phoenicians. Sort of the argument that Phoenicians were early settlers to Britain and Ireland, which, myth. So no, but this was a very fascinating book. Next is yet another work of ancient history, The Last Pharaohs, Egypt under the Ptolemies 305 to 30 BC by J.G. Manning. picked this up from Princeton University Press during one of their sales. And this is about Egypt under the Ptolemaic dynasty. I read this a long time ago through an interlibrary loan, but I've always been interested in the Ptolemies and Ptolemaic Egypt, and I wanted to have this. I remember this being a bit, I think, dry, but I mean, it has been quite a while since I read it, and I need to get around to it again. I'll reread it at some point. And next is a duology of Nazi history, of German history under the Nazis. The first book is The Hitler Years, Triumph 1933 to 1939 by Frank McDonough. So this is obviously a history of the Nazis coming to power and empire and the beginning of World War II. And the second book is The Hitler Years, Disaster 1940 to 1945 by Frank McDonough, obviously. And this is basically World War II and the collapse of Nazi Germany. So yeah, I picked these up from Book Depository and have not yet gotten to them yet. So that concludes part 20 of my 2022 library tour, and also part 8, I think. No, yeah. Whatever part of history it is, I just forgot. Anyway, so I'll be back tomorrow with part 21 and continuing with history. So until then, BookTube, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.